On today's show, we'll be joined by weekly co-host Ben DuBose to discuss what the concern level should be surrounding Jalen Green after his most recent performance against the Minnesota Timberwolves and what that says about the issues with the Houston Rockets coaching staff, the Alperen Sengun defense narrative receiving some national pushback, and then reportedly the Milwaukee Bucks offering 4 second-round draft picks for Eric Gordon. Is that a good deal for the Houston Rockets? We're going to break down all of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
Hey, Houston fans, I am so happy.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can help the show out tremendously by commenting anything below. As always, appreciate you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day, whether it's on the way to work or on your lunch break or in the gym. Thank you for making LOR part of your day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. And joining us now is your weekly co-host, Rockets Wire editor, and host of the Logger Line podcast, the podfather himself, Ben DuBose. You can follow on Twitter at Ben DuBose. And Ben, we've got a handful, a smorgasbord of topics to talk about today. We'll talk a little bit about Jalen Green's struggles, the concern level, and whether it's rising or just kind of where the concern level should be at with Jalen Green, as well as the Alperen Sengun defense narrative with a couple of the national media guys sharing their thoughts. Sam Vecenie, Zach Lowe kind of pushing back a little bit, or in Sam Vecenie's case, kind of leaning into the idea that Sengun is, has some defensive issues on that side of the ball, as well as the latest reporting on Eric Gordon and the quest for a first-round draft pick by the Houston Rockets. That's what we're going to have to call this from now on. But let's start with Jalen Green and his most recent performance against the T-Wolves. This was not a great game, Ben, and I kind of already shared some thoughts in the immediate aftermath of that game in our most recent episode. But to you right now, where do you think the concern level should be at right now regarding the 13-game losing streak, Jalen Green, coaching, kind of all of it? Because I think so much of those things they're feeding into each other at this point, and that's where I think a lot of the concern kind of comes from.
For sure. And I thought Jalen's performance Saturday against Minnesota was so telling, because you had the juxtaposition of watching Anthony Edwards go off for 44. And so many of us have made the Jalen Green, Anthony Edwards comparison. Anthony being the number 1 pick from the 2020 draft, Jalen number 2 in 2021. Anthony had the big breakout in year 2. A lot of us were hoping to see the same type of thing from Jalen Green in year 2 for him, especially after Jalen finished year 1 strong, much the same way that Anthony Edwards did. And unfortunately, it just hasn't translated to the same extent. Now, I know the surrounding infrastructure and the coaching, it's not an apples to apples with what Anthony has in Minnesota. And I know he's now in year 3 compared to Jalen in year 2. Nonetheless, given the comparisons that many of us, including myself, have made between those two guys, to see a difference that staggering on the court, to see Anthony just bullying him at times in that game on Saturday night, was just very discouraging, especially after it came after the game against Charlotte, in which Jalen tied his career high with 41. I know they didn't win, but it looked like he finally had some things going, some continuity. And it feels like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. You see the high points, but they're fewer and farther between, especially the last 20 to 25 games. And yeah, it's discouraging because you can see that it's taking a toll on him in other areas of the game. He's even more careless with the ball. His defensive lapses are more frequent. And you can just see that mentally he is really struggling. And he alluded to that in a recent interview with Mark Berman, talking about how the losses are getting to him more this season. I think last year, perhaps they expected to lose. It was year 1. They didn't have much continuity at all. This year, they expected things to get better, and they haven't. And I think it's troubling for Jalen. Now, granted, it's just year 2, 20 years old. He still has plenty of time. But I also think, quite frankly, it's an indictment of the coaching staff that, for one reason or another, I don't think this coaching staff has things under control, not just in terms of the day-to-day, but in the big picture of this season. There's a lot of guys who you can see the frustration boiling over, even though he's had a strong January. We've talked about Eric Gordon from time to time, supposed to be the veteran influence. You can see his focus drifting, especially early in the season, and the coaching staff being unable to keep him on the straight and narrow. Now we're starting to see it with Jalen Green as well, who's supposed to be the focal point for really the entire development of this generation of the Rockets. And I do think that on some level, not just in terms of how they're used X's and O's, but just the mental focus, it's on the coaching staff. And there were times that game on Saturday that I wanted to see Jalen get pulled just to make a statement. Look, Josh Christopher, say what you will about him, but he was playing fairly hard in that game, I thought, a lot harder than Jalen. And you could make the case that perhaps Josh Christopher is playing harder because guess what? He's been out of the lineup and he feels like he has to play hard to justify his spot. And sometimes that type of accountability can work. And even though Jalen is the number one, or perhaps because he's the number one, I think it could be a pretty powerful statement if from time to time you show that accountability that applies to him as well. And really, it really struck a chord in me, because to see Jalen regress like he has for most of this season, we talked about Stephen Silas going into this year, this being the last fully guaranteed year of his contract. The one positive that you could clearly point to over his first two seasons, and especially last year, which felt like the first true season of the rebuild with the young core in place, you could point out that Jalen Green finished the year a lot better than he started. They had a system that was really optimized for the backcourt, Jalen in particular. And by the end of the year, it seemed to be working out, especially for him on an individual level, even if it wasn't for the collective. Now that doesn't even apply because we've seen the regression. I know Alperen Sengun has taken a step forward, but no, I'm not crediting Alperen Sengun's breakout to a coaching masterclass when coming into this season, they had him coming off the bench behind Bruno Fernando, who's not even consistently in the rotation anymore. Come on, I'm not going to give that to the coaching staff. The closest thing you could give to the staff in terms of what is clearly a positive was Jalen Green, and now that's a negative. We know they haven't gotten better collectively. A lot of the prospects are not taking a step forward. So what exactly is the positive here? We can go back and forth on who's responsible. We do this on social media, message boards all the time. You know, Steven Silas, Rafael Stone, Tillman Fertitta. Look, with Rafael Stone, I'm not saying the guy's perfect. We can at least point to some things, trades he's done, draft picks, contract structures that have been wins, that are clear positives. What is the positive at this point for Steven Silas? It's not a right, it's a privilege to have one of the 30 jobs in the best basketball league in the world. And you're trying to be the best team out of 30 eventually. It may not be fair to Steven. He's a nice guy, but the bar is really, really high. And if after 3 seasons, and we're now midway through the third, we don't have any clear positives, again, the closest thing going into this year was Jalen's development. And now that's taken a step back. At some point, even if the plan was 5-6 years to rebuild, whatever you want to say that, you know, Steven Silas sold his vision as being, at some point, you've got to have some key performance indicators that tell you that this thing is going in the right direction. At this point, I don't know what those are. And so it's pretty difficult not to make a case for looking somewhere else for an upgrade. Again, it's not a right, it's a privilege. The bar is really high. It may not be entirely fair, but guess what? They're compensated very well for that type of instability. And right now, with Jalen taking a step back, I think it just highlights the fact that, look, we're in year 3, and I don't know where the positives are for this coaching staff. And that alone should tell you that, be it during the season or after, at some point, a change is probably going to need to be made.
Yeah, it's pretty damning that you can't sit here, and I can't either, Ben. I don't have a single positive thing to point to except for, like you said, right, last season, maybe you can point to the individual development of some of the guys, namely Jalen Green, the strides that he took at the end of last season, and now we can't even point to that anymore. So it is entirely concerning. I said it before, I thought the Charlotte game would be the straw that broke the camel's back. We haven't seen that happen yet, but with the losing streak continuing to grow, 13 games strong right now with really kind of no end in sight at this point. Like, I think maybe on the schedule, you look at the Detroit Pistons game a little under a week from the release of this episode, Saturday, late, end of January. Maybe that's the game where they are maybe favored to actually be winners. But I don't know. This whole thing is kind of snowballing quickly, and something has to give. Something has to change. They cannot try to maintain status quo like this for the rest of the season. Coming up, I wanted to do.
Oh my, someone called the National Weather Service. We had an unanticipated storm in the building tonight.
The unanticipated storm was Ben DuBose's rant on the situation at hand right now with the Houston Rockets. I should have played that right. Situation's crazy. It might not be able to be, it can't be fixed. Coming up, we're going to change gears, going to a bit more of a positive discussion. And the fact that the Rockets are getting maybe some national media love, some pushback on the narrative that Alperen Sengun is a disaster defensively. Zach Lowe and Sam Vecini sharing their thoughts on Alp and kind of his usage with the Rockets and his role with this Houston Rockets team. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at Prize Picks. Next game, I think I'm taking Jalen Green to score less than 23.5 points. He's been struggling as of late, unfortunately. What about Tari Eason to have more than 7.5 rebounds? He's been a monster on the glass in the minutes that he's been getting. Plus, we don't really have a timetable on return for Jabari Smith Jr. What about Alperen Sengun to have more than 5.5 assists? That seems pretty solid given the fact that he's been facilitating at a high level as of late. So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That's NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA. It just keeps going on and on and on. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They're safe and offer fast withdrawals. Currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, been one of the topics at hand this season and even stretching into last season was, Alp, right? He may be incredible on the offensive end, which he is, and it's been a breath of fresh air to kind of see the Rockets leaning more into that over this recent stretch of games in the absence of Kevin Porter Jr. We've seen some really fantastic performances from Alp in that stretch, but the argument has always been, well, what can you really build around this guy if he's an issue on the defensive end? And thankfully, a couple of the national media guys, Zach Lowe, Sam Vecini, have kind of chimed in with their thoughts on the Alperen Sengun debate. So let's run the Zach Lowe clip really quick, and then we'll talk about what Zach Lowe had to say about Sengun.
Let's talk about a guy who makes good decisions. They made the reverse of that trade at the next draft, getting 2 protected first-round picks from the Rockets, who traded up for Alperen Sengun. Yeah. And if you've been watching the Rockets lately, I just made fun of them. One thing you can't make fun of is that dude is good. Like, that dude's already good. He's good now. Yeah. Is there Sengun regret, or is this just the cost of doing business in the NBA? Sometimes these things happen. Like, how much do Thunder fans sit there and think, we're talking about what big's going to be on the team next year? Well, we have Chet, maybe, so we don't care that we don't have Sengun. Is there any Sengun regret?
There's not, if only for the reason that the defense stuff would be really tough in OKC. Like, I don't know how he gets on the court for Mark, because he's it's just hard to build around a center that doesn't play defense. And I think
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I don't think he's as bad as people are making him out to be, because now, is he good? No, but for his age, he tries hard and he's smart, and you can hear him talking to his teammates in a way that suggests he's the only guy on the floor that actually knows what the offense is trying to do, and he gets vertical. Like, I get what you're saying. I just don't think he's as bad as people think, and given where he is developmentally, I think there's a roadmap to where he becomes an okay defensive center.
So that's Zach Lowe kind of pushing back on this narrative that has seemed to creep up around Alperen Sengun and the fact that he, this idea that he doesn't play defense or he can't play defense. And we've pushed back on that a little bit here on this very podcast. And Ben, I think it's very true at this point. Like, Alp has his deficiencies defensively. Absolutely. He doesn't move laterally the quickest. He's not the longest. He's not the tallest. Even though he relies on strength as part of his game, especially offensively when he's backing out opposing players, he's not the strongest or most physical guy on the defensive end. But for all of that, I think he does still try defensively, and he's made progress. He's in the right spots. He gets a very unfavorable whistle at times, even when he's maintaining verticality. But I think there's very much a world, as Zach Lowe points out, that you can envision a future in which Sengun is maybe not ever like a plus defender, but at least not like a traffic cone defensively, right? Where he's giving up points constantly on that. And I think he can get to a place where he's neutral on defense.
At least passable. And it's so hard to evaluate him on this team because of the total lack of perimeter defense. It's not just Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green. For the most part, Eric Gordon has not been dialed in this season at all. And so when there's zero denial of dribble penetration, it's so tough to truly evaluate a big who is constantly just hung out to dry and put it in impossible situations where he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't in terms of stepping out or helping or staying on his man. Oftentimes he's in no man's land, but he actually is trying. And I really like the graphic that Matt Moore at HP Basketball on Twitter put out this morning talking about the last 10 games, and it shared the offensive, defensive, and overall net ratings. And the Rockets over the last 10 games that Sengun has been just going crazy, basically since the start of 2023, the Rockets are -6 when he's on the court, which is really not that damning. This is a team, keep in mind, that's on a 13-game losing streak, and they're really bad. They're 10-36. But they're -26.5 when he's off. That's a 20-point differential on-off for Sengun. And that is actually the, by far, biggest split. I've been waiting to see this with one of the Rockets' young players really since the start of last season. Since the Rockets started having somewhat of a young core, we've been tracking not just the conventional numbers, but also how does it impact winning? And of course, it's tough to do that all the time with a team like this because they're going to be bad no matter what. But one of the things that was sort of nagging about Jalen and KPJ a year ago, they would have stretches where they were on. But if you look at the net ratings and the differentials, many times the Rockets were at their best with Eric Gordon or Garrison Matthews in those roles simply because they knew how to play. And there is a big learning curve, of course, young guys versus veterans. And it was always sort of, okay, what's the first young guy that's not just going to put up raw numbers, but be able to do it in a winning environment? And I don't want to say that, clearly it's not a winning environment. They've lost 13 straight games, but Alperen Sengun is contributing to potential wins as evidenced by the on-off. I don't think over 10 games that it's misleading. I figure that start over 10 games, a difference that dramatic when he's on the court and off, that is telling you that there's something to the idea, not just offensively, but defensively as well. This team is functioning better when he is on the court. Is it all relative? Yes, but the same thing applies to all of Houston's young prospects. So I do think it's important to keep in mind. And I also think that we're rapidly approaching a point this offseason. We talked about some of the issues with this coaching staff, and I think I don't see a world where there's not a coaching search in 3 months. That would just be stunning at this point, with this being the last year of Steven Silas' contract and all the issues that we were going into. The Rockets are also going to have $60 million or up to that in cap space this summer. The point is that with a coaching search and then tons of cap room, it's not all about your own internal analysis anymore. It's also going to be about how other people externally view your franchise, because these guys that you're going to be hopefully trying to bring on board as leaders of the organization in terms of the coaching staff on the court, they are going to want to make sure that they're on the same page with you. So at some point, if the Rockets internally are not giving Sengun a fair shake, and I do think that perhaps it's starting to tilt in the right direction. I can buy that perhaps Sengun wasn't in ideal shape going into the preseason and training camp, and perhaps that's why, the Bruno Fernando dance happened early in the season, and now he's getting in better shape, and that's helping him be better defensively as well. And perhaps now the Rockets are rewarding him with even more usage, aside from the Kevin Porter Jr. injury situation.
Can I offer an alternative viewpoint on that? On the Sengun, Bruno Fernando stuff to start the season?
Sure.
Where's my Kanye clip? I'm not gonna dig it up. But I mean, look, I don't necessarily, because we saw Sengun playing in Eurobasket. He looked great. He looked fantastic in Eurobasket. I don't necessarily buy the idea that he was like out of shape or wasn't, ready to go. I think it was maybe more of like a trust thing, a role thing, maybe even an ego thing, because think about it. This is a Rockets coaching staff that has been trying to get Sengun to fill this rim runner role, right? They have basically minimized his role to being this very niche rim running big, almost very, very few post touches, not leaning into what he can excel at as a player whatsoever. So imagine you come into training camp, you're Alperen Sengun, you were an MVP at 18 years old, right? You just finished kicking ass in Eurobasket, going toe to toe with some of the best international players in the game overseas. and you come back into camp for your NBA team, and they're like, hey, we want you to play this way now. Play this style that is not suited to your strengths whatsoever, and we just want you to do this. You're gonna do all the dirty work. You're gonna screen. You're gonna defend. You're gonna do this, that, but you don't get any post touches. You don't get this, that, and the other thing. I feel like that maybe played a role in why Sengun was maybe, not playing the best through training camp, why Bruno Fernando looked better than Sengun, because that role is better suited to Bruno's strengths.
Square peg, round hole, that kind of thing. Exactly.
And now as the season has progressed and as the Rockets have gotten back to leaning into the things that Alp can be good at and that he can thrive at doing, he looks better, right? He looks more engaged. He looks more impactful on both ends of the court. Things are looking better because they're finally actually catering to him a bit.
Yeah, and the injury absences, not just KPJ, but Jabari Smith, who had taken on a bigger role offensively the last couple of weeks, that's tilted it even more. And so I think that's further nudged the coaching staff or whoever you want to attribute it to in that direction. But the larger point that I was trying to make, let's use a couple of extreme examples, but you're going into the offseason, and let's say that Quinn Snyder and James Harden are open to joining your franchise and kickstarting you into, I guess, the next phase of your rebuild, into trying to win as soon as next season. But they hold similar viewpoints to Zach Lowe and the types of national guys that we've been discussing, that Sengun should be a bigger part of the plan, that he isn't the liability that people here have feared that he might be over the last year and a half. If that's the case, you have to at some point adjust your thinking to what people externally are telling you as well, because they're going to have choices. I do think the Rockets are better positioned to make, a big hire, especially on the coaching front now than 3 years ago. Look, you do have young talent in place. You've got a ton of financial flexibility. You've got a lot of young talent. You've got decent draft assets moving forward. This isn't like 2020 late 2020, that is, when James Harden had one foot out the door and you had an old roster outside of him, not much in the way of young talent or draft capital, financial hell. You got a chance. But look, you're going to have to be on the same page, front office, ownership, and coaching staff, with how these prospects are evaluated. And if people outside the organization have a higher view of Sengun and want him to be a bigger part of the plan, then you're going to have to be, in many cases, to lure the best talent to your organization, amenable to working with them on their view. The last couple of years, it's just been about the Rockets. They haven't had any cap room to spend, and they haven't really tried to win anyway. So it's been just pretty much internally, okay, we're going to develop the guys in our system. We're going to see how they grow. Starting this offseason, it's going to have to be a marriage of what you think and, the Rafael Stone, Tillman Fertitta, front office, ownership edict, with a blend of also what the market is telling you in order to get the right candidates. And we need to prepare ourselves to the possibility that, people coming in may have similar views to what, you played on that podcast. And if that's the case, then it may be in the Rockets' best interest to start shifting their views as well.
We didn't get a chance to get to any specific comments from Sam Vecini, although he basically echoed a similar sentiment to what you shared earlier, Ben, just that there is context to be provided around some of the issues with Sengun defensively, namely the fact that there is little to no perimeter defense being played on this Rockets team, which then kind of exacerbates the entire situation because it makes Sengun look even worse, because at times he's making up for the lack of perimeter defense. Right. He's guarding two guys on the pick and roll. All of it looks bad. And so unfortunately for that, Vecini's got his own question marks about Sengun and how he would fit moving forward. But I think the one thing that we can kind of get rid of, and that is no longer a question mark, is the kid can produce offensively, right? The team is going to look bad defensively almost regardless of what you do at this point, unless you start bringing in some veterans, rounding out the roster, which is something that we hope see happens this offseason. But right now, the team's going to look bad on defense, whether you run through Kevin Porter Jr., whether you run through Jalen Green, or whether you run through Alperen Sengun. So might as well run it through the one guy who has been able to consistently produce offensively when given the larger usage, the larger role, all of the above. So with that coming up, let's talk a little bit about Eric Gordon and the trade market and whether or not Eric Gordon is going to retire a Houston Rocket, or if there's actually a trade out there that makes sense. Plus Mark Stein kind of sharing the fact that the Bucks are trying to offer up 4 second-round draft picks for Eric Gordon. Oh my, indeed. And the Rockets are turning their nose up at that offer. Should they be at this point? We'll talk about that coming up in just a moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are here, and we're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they are the #1 sports book in America, FanDuel. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers join today to get started with $150 in free bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlays. Right now, you can head over to FanDuel to take a look at who the NBA champion odds-on favorites are for this season. Right now, the Boston Celtics leading the way at plus 390. The Bucks right behind them at plus 550. Brooklyn Nets and Denver Nuggets both at plus 800. Got the Golden State Warriors at plus 850. And then the Memphis Grizzlies rounding out the top 6 at plus 1,000. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's talk a little NBA reporting, if you will, Ben, with the Milwaukee Bucks open to trading 4, count them, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 second-round draft picks for Eric Gordon.
Oh, my.
And the Rockets seemingly turning their noses up at this offer, still seeking a first-round draft pick. Ben, I know we have been beating this drum for a while now, needing to move on from Eric Gordon. Or at least not even necessarily needing to move it, but just figuring out what is going to happen with Eric Gordon, right? Because maybe there is a world, right, where if James Harden wants to come back to Houston, and if James Harden wants Eric Gordon here, we know that those guys are close. Maybe there's a world where it makes sense to hold on to Eric Gordon.
Yeah, but that's more valuable than a late second-round draft pick. But yes, figure it out one way or another. Be decisive. If that's the world, and maybe give him, the contract, not extension, but picking up the option a few months early.
Yeah,
the peace of mind that he needs.
Either that, right? Pick up the option, give him an extension if needed. Like, give him the peace of mind, because right now, what is happening is not benefiting anybody, right? Eric Gordon is going through the motions. He looks bad on the court. I'm sure he's frustrated behind the scenes. And if he is, then what's to stop him from talking poorly about the organization to other players, right? Players talk around the league. And by mishandling this Eric Gordon situation, I do think this is one of the red flags of the Rockets front office during this rebuilding tenure is, you should have moved on from Eric Gordon when he was putting up career high numbers a year ago, right? That would have been the optimal time to move on from EG. And now it feels like you're kind of digging your heels in. You have an offer for 4 seconds on the table, and yet now you're like, no, we still want a first, but it's got to be a good first. Like, I don't know what to make of this situation.
Yeah, if I had to guess from being on the outside, I think maybe they over-attributed some of the contract year factors to him, because you hear a lot about NBA guys that are super incentivized in their contract year, which Eric Gordon theoretically is, because next year isn't guaranteed. This is the last fully guaranteed season. But he's
shout out to Trevor Ariza, who is the best contract year player of all time. That man is fool's gold in a contract year.
But I think Eric's personality is a little bit different. And also, he's 34 years old. He's made a lot of money. So I think that might be a factor that's not quite as important as it would be to other players. And so I don't know that, playing for his next contract, especially on a team this bad, in which generally it's so lethargic, it's tough to get up for games anyway. I just think that factor is not as important for this season's Eric Gordon as it might be for different players that are maybe slightly younger and also on a team where there's just more energy in general. So that's sort of my guess as to what's going on. But yeah, one way or another, I'm open to keeping him. If all you can get is a second-round pick, then look, I've said before, I am very open to a James Harden return. I'm bullish on what he could do with this group and the value he could provide with his playmaking and his leadership. I know some will laugh at that, but I actually think he'd be a good fit for this team. Not over Scoot Henderson, but again, there's only a 13% shot at Scoot Henderson. So if they end up with the number 2 pick, I'll potentially revise my opinion at that time. But right now, if you can potentially boost your odds that James Harden and Tim McMahon dropped that nugget on his podcast last week, then sure, I'm open to keeping Eric Gordon around. But if not, then, resolve it one way or another. A second round pick is better than just, letting him walk to open up more cap space this summer if that's what you plan to do. And you could potentially re-sign him anyway, although I guess that's a little less likely than you think, because the odds are a team trading for him may end up, picking up that option. So you may have to try and find some resolution the next few weeks. But I think just come to come to an understanding. It just feels like they've pushed this back. They haven't been decisive. And you're getting to a point in the next couple of weeks where it feels like one way or another, Stone in that front office needs to figure out what the plan is.
Absolutely. I mean, we are about a couple weeks removed from what will be the NBA trade deadline. I believe it's February 9th this year. Right?
Thursday afternoon. Yep.
There you go. Thursday afternoon, February 9th.
So 2.5 weeks. Yeah.
Two and a half weeks removed from the trade deadline. And you've got to come to a resolution with Eric Gordon. And at this point, I mean, it wouldn't feel great, Ben, taking 4 second rounders that are all going to be probably relatively trash in the grand scheme of things. But at the same time, like you said, that's better than letting him walk for absolutely nothing this offseason. Yeah. I just feel like right now the organization just doesn't have a clear direction on what they want to do. And that is the biggest issue, right? Is they don't know, do we want to hold on to him? Do we want to let him go? Do we want to trade him and open up more minutes for the young guys? Do we think James Harden's coming back? Like, they've got so many different potential pathways to go with this thing, and they haven't been able to settle on one specific direction where they're all in lockstep. And they're like, no, this is the direction we want to go, which means, no, we're trading Eric Gordon, get him out of here, or yes, we're extending him and doing this. It feels like they want to maintain that flexibility, that optionality. And because of that, because of them wanting to maintain that level of, we could go this way or could go this way, it's resulting in bad day-to-day operations right now. And that's what we're seeing on the court with Eric Gordon kind of going through the motions, looking checked out, all that stuff.
Although I will say, I think that Bucks offer is way overplayed. That's one that sounds so much better in the 280 character world of Twitter than it does in reality. Because for late second round picks, the NBA is a quality over quantity league anyway. And then when we're talking the back half of the second round, which picks from Milwaukee and, it's the lower of Cleveland and Golden State. So that's going to be pretty low as well. Those are picks that you can buy. That's how the Rockets got KJ Martin a couple of years ago at pick 52 in the second round. You can buy those every single year or acquire those for taking on, it's the same principle, negative valued contracts. The way the Rockets have in deals with, there was the one with Brooklyn and then, the David Nwaba trade with OKC, the Derek Favors thing last year. So they've done that twice already. You can find those types. And quite frankly, the picks they've gotten for that are actually better than that. So I actually shouldn't compare it to that because like the pick from OKC could actually be a decent second round pick. So I think in this case, it's very easy to say, 4 second round picks. Honestly, when we're talking second rounds, late second round is not really anything that you want to get excited about. In many cases, those guys will make it through and you can sign them as an undrafted free agent anyway, and to more favorable contract terms than what you could potentially do if you draft them at, say, pick 55. There's just not a ton of value. I just don't see that as, it's worth. The Bucks have to try it because they don't have any second round pick. If they're not willing to give up a first and none of their second round picks are attractive, then they have to sort of try and beat their lack of quality with quantity. It is worth a shot. But if I'm the Rockets, number one, you have to focus on first round assets, which has been reported. I know if they end up getting a first or not getting a first, people are going to say, there were allegedly first available a year ago. Look, that's water under the bridge. What's done is done. You can't, go into this deadline trying to sort of win negotiations from a year ago. The landscape now is what it is, and you have to take a loss. You have to take a loss. That just happens sometimes. You have to make the best of the current situations. It can't be about trying to, win a negotiating battle from 12 months ago. That's not how you build a contender. You've got to just sometimes make the best of a bad situation sometimes, and that may be where we're going with Eric Gordon. But if you can't get that first, then I would really focus on a team like the Lakers. I've said, for me, the Pat Beverly and a second package, if that was theoretically available, if the Lakers want to try and do something to not punt on a second straight year of LeBron James in his late 30s, now 38 years old, I would go down that path because there's more upside to a second round pick from the Lakers. I think that's way more valuable than even 4 second round picks that are likely to be late. And I also think in the short term, Beverly's a guy, number one, his contract expires after this year. It's not like the Bucks where I think to make it work, you would also have to, take back a contract that potentially eats into your salary cap room. Now, maybe
bad
you can,
money. Yeah.
Maybe you can move that to a third team, but it is more work to be done. Whereas Pat Beverly's a straight apples to apples that can largely work. You might have to add in one minor salary, but it's almost there. Beverly's like an expiring $13 million figure. And I also think for this year, Beverly might be a slightly better fit than Gordon because of his point of attack defense, which we talked about earlier in the Sengun discussion, is a clear deficiency for this team. I think having someone like Beverly on the perimeter that can actually stay in front of his man, that might be a better fit for what this particular Rockets group needs, and another ball handler, which we've seen at times with, thankfully, the Jae'Sean Nix experiment seems to have run its course now. I think that to me is a far more intriguing fit than the Bucks. Now, is it available? I don't know. We'll have to see what the Lakers choose to do, but that's just an example. And there may be other teams as well. Eric Gordon is a guy, and we've seen it this month now that he's sort of, ever since the New Year's Eve comments about the lack of improvement, that seems to have sort of lit a fire in him. Because, of course, there was a little bit of blowback on him as well. People saying, well, what are you doing to help this situation? And since then, I think he's played a ton better. Certainly, he's been more aggressive offensively, and there are more opportunities now with no Kevin Porter Jr., no Jabari Smith Jr. He's taken a bit more ball handling as well, so he gets more touches. But I also think, he's trying to show, some pride, both in the context of this team and the comments he made, and also trying to perhaps build up his market for the trade deadline. He's also playing back-to-back.
Oh, my.
Yeah, he's playing back-to-backs now, which he wasn't before. So, there should be other opportunities as well. But I just think, ideally you want a first, but if you can't get a first, focus on quality over quantity. That 4 second-round pick offer is the classic example of something that it really sounds good on Twitter, but in reality, I don't think it's that great.
It's a poo-poo platter. That's what it is. It's a poo-poo platter. We don't want it. With that, Ben, the drill. Let everyone know where to track you down at.
Yep. The Rockets Wire on Twitter, the Logger Line on Twitter. Those are the handles for, of course, our USA Today Rockets blog and my weekly co-host, my podcast, weekly with co-host Paolo Alves, courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carback Brewing. That's where you can find the show pages for those. And me, I'm on there at Ben DuBose, and then rocketswire.usatoday.com. That's the direct link to the website where you can find all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts on Jalen Green. Let me know your thoughts on the Alperen Sengun defense narrative. Should the Rockets trade EG for the 4 second-round draft picks, or do you think that they can get more? Tell me in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.